Hi, welcome to our demo. I'm Don Wake. I'm a technical marketing engineer with Hewlett Packard Enterprise. And today we're going to talk about Kubernetes and how you can utilize that and also manage a multi-cloud environment. With me today is Terry Chang, a data scientist,
Hello.
and also Sandeep Deshmukh, platform product manager. He's going to talk to us about Kubernetes and our KubeDirector application.
Hello.
All right, so let's jump right in here. Let's set the stage. What are we talking about with regard to containers and Kubernetes? With containers, it's really the key to the hybrid cloud. And we're going to be talking about that concept throughout this presentation. That container infrastructure is really fueling the software development of the next decade, and put that into the context of on-premises and also public cloud. You can see from the 90s, we've all experienced the cloud, the client server, everything over the network, lots of high bandwidth communications. We then virtualized servers to take more advantage of the hardware we were using. The cloud started to emerge in the 2010s, so you had a lot of public cloud vendors coming out and making it easier to go in and sort of rent to own or just rent your own hardware over the cloud. But then we started to see just a growth in management complexity. So virtual machines are fairly heavy in terms of a management. You may have one physical server, and now you virtualize it. You have hundreds of servers that you still have to manage as if they're real servers. So in the 2015 to now timeframe, containers are a way of a much lighter weight way to focus on the application itself as a virtual entity and reuse a lot of the operating system pieces. So you can have multi-tenant, multiple different applications containerized in the same physical resource or virtual resource. You can see that has grown substantially, and by 2021, 1.8 billion different enterprises will be using containers in some way. And by 2022, just right around the corner, 75% of enterprises are going to be using and deploying containers. And just over half of those enterprises will still be using on-prem data centers. So there's some workloads that they still want to have some hybrid approach, something on-prem and in the cloud. So talking about Kubernetes, it's really the de facto standard, open source, very powerful way to orchestrate your containers. But how about also wrapping on top of that management in a hybrid or multi-cloud environment? And when you have many, many different applications and different requirements, how do you leverage Kubernetes and make it as simple as possible to install, manage, and scale those applications within that multi-cloud environment? And then there's other complex new types of data-hungry workloads, such as machine learning, requiring model building, training, and deployment. And how do you work all that in as well on top of all this infrastructure? So Terry, why don't you walk us through how HPE is trying to utilize the Kubernetes open source and help people manage their containers?
Yeah, sure, Don. So this is a very high-level overview of the HPE Ezmeral container platform. As you can see, this satisfies a lot of different personas, different team members. Your IT can actually pull together resources from on-prem, bare metal, or even public cloud, or even VMs, and pull them into a single pane of glass, as you see here. They can then create different clusters with different applications, such as Spark or Kafka, and they can hand them off to different users, such as the data engineers or data scientists, or even app developers and DevOps engineers. And all of this is wrapped in enterprise-grade security. As of late, we were just certified as a gold member of the CNCF, certified Kubernetes. So we have that, which pretty much shows that HPE is pretty active in providing open source Kubernetes solutions. And the entire platform is actually sitting on top of the HPE Ezmeral data fabric, which is formerly known as MapR.
Okay, fantastic. So there's really a lot to dig into about how you can utilize Kubernetes and in this open source environment. So I'm going to go ahead and jump into a demo environment we have. And in fact, this is one that you can check out for yourself. I'm going to show you a link to a demo portal so you can go in here and experience the Kubernetes interface that we've created in our container platform yourself. So you also have access to a video that you can play to get a little more information about that. But let's dive into creating a Kubernetes cluster in a multi-cloud environment here. So we have in this demo the possibility to jump into an interactive demo. So Terry, I guess this would now be the container platform. So in order to create my cluster, I guess the first thing I got to do is log in.
Yeah, so we're going to log into the platform as our site administrator role, and here you'll see the global settings. And today we're going to focus mainly on the Kubernetes section. We do have our legacy Epic section, but here we're going to see our creation of a Kubernetes cluster within the container platform.
So it looks like, just to interrupt you for a second, that I'm seeing a few other clusters as well. So it looks like, you know, it's not just one cluster you're managing. You can manage multiple clusters within this environment.
Correct. So you can create your own cluster here, and you could specify the name, whatever name you want to give it to your cluster. And most importantly, you can specify what compute resources you want to allocate for either the master or worker. Here, we only have VMs, but you could add cloud host, bare metal host, and you can mix and match in a hybrid deployment of your Kubernetes cluster. And once you're ready, you click submit and you go into the next section where you can then select the Kubernetes version that you want, as well as include some storage as well.
So that's an important aspect as well, is we don't only force you to use one version of Kubernetes. A lot of organizations may need to use multiple versions depending on dependencies they may have on certain legacy workloads. So that's good to see that you can change versions. Okay, so I hit next. Now it looks like this is what, a summary of my Kubernetes cluster then.
Yep, so we're at the final stage, and then you could click submit, and within a few minutes, your Kubernetes cluster will be up and running.
All right, so that's fantastic. So we've got a new Kubernetes cluster. We're going to go ahead and return home. And then, so now tenants. So Sandeep, I'm going to bring you in here. I'm going to go into the interactive demo on tenants. So can you explain to me what it is I'm doing here as a tenant within that Kubernetes cluster that I just created?
Yeah, sure. So tenants in synonymous in Kubernetes to the namespaces, and a tenant is a way of isolating a project or a team that needs to work on a certain set of data and code and all that, and needs to be separated out from the other tenants or projects or other thing. And in Kubernetes, that's synonymous to a namespace in which the user projects does all its work.
Okay.
So, yeah, so I think you're going to give, and at the bottom of the screen, you'll see some of the quotas and stuff like that. And that's one way that admins would restrict a tenant from taking over an entire cluster. So Kubernetes cluster would have tens or hundreds of tenants, but we don't want one or two users or one or two tenants to take over the entire resources of the Kubernetes cluster. So this is one way of allocating the right set of quotas based on priorities and the work the users have to do.
Okay, so we're leveraging really a Kubernetes auto-scaling approach. I guess the kubelet would then enforce those limits that we put on there then. Okay, so we created a tenant, we've created a cluster, we've divided up the resources, we've set some quotas, and then we'll go ahead and talk about creating and deploying Kubernetes apps. So we now have this potentially multi-cloud, hybrid cloud Kubernetes cluster with a tenant we've created. We're going to log back in. And now going to that tenant, so now we've say we've hired some developers or a new team, and they're going to use our new tenant. And now we need to give them applications. So this is where another product that's also open source comes in. So why don't you walk me through this, Sandeep? What am I doing here in the tenant? Looks like I've got a dashboard of all of the multi-cloud resources I'm using for this particular tenant. And then I can connect actually here to the terminal. So I'm in now the terminal for the tenant.
Yeah, this is a very important feature from the container platform, which is called the Web Terminal. And the Web Terminal is essentially a pod that's running in Kubernetes. And for a user, it's very convenient because it sets all the context. So you're already within your namespace, and all of the Kubernetes context is set up ahead of time when you open this Web Terminal. And now you can do your kubectl commands, or you can do Helm or anything else to develop and deploy apps.
Okay, so it looks like, so I'm doing kubectl apply. I've got a JSON file here, and that simply imported it into my existing Kubernetes cluster. So now I can go into applications, I guess. So I've run standard JSON. So there's nothing proprietary here, right? This is totally. Yeah,
this is something maybe I should spend just a minute on KubeDirector. So this application that you're trying to do is being deployed as a KubeDirector app, And KubeDirector is part of Ezmeral Container Platform, is essentially a custom controller of Kubernetes, which provides an easy way to create, register, and deploy stateful applications as a web service. And when authoring these apps using KubeDirector, any tenant user, here you're doing as admin, but any tenant user could create a JSON file with the image and other metadata information, and then just apply that YAML to deploy that application, which I think you're going to show next.
Okay, so that's great. So we're using really standard processes within within our environment here. We've defined an application that we're going to launch. Now we're in our KubeDirector running app, and we're going to launch that. It looks like I now have a YAML file to further configure the launch of this app that we've imported with KubeDirector. So I can adjust the memory, looks like, set limits. So I'm saying the memory I can only reduce to 5. My CPU, I can say, well, this particular one needs 4, and CPU limits. Okay, so I guess the last step here is just submit it. So what we see down here is just a list of all of the running applications that are in our KubeDirector Kubernetes cluster. Okay.
Yeah. And the convenience of this is now that this is deployed running, there is it has a service endpoint which the users can use to connect to this application.
Okay, so one-stop shop, really. Okay, so we'll exit full screen here on our demo. And so coming back to really just reiterate what we just talked about. So the container platform is a way that you can use Kubernetes and create clusters. And as Terry showed, when we were allocating the resources, we were choosing virtual machines. We could choose bare metal within our on-prem data center. We could be using your favorite public cloud. So it's truly a multi-cloud hybrid environment. Kubernetes provides an excellent platform that we can then overlay these other tools on using the HPE Ezmeral Container Platform, for example, to create this multi-tenant management, as we showed with creating the tenants and carving down the resources for a given group, synonymous with a namespace in Kubernetes. And finally, we talked about KubeDirector, an open source project that allows you to use Kubernetes, K8S for short, to enable these stateful and scale out application clusters very transparently and simply. So you can see we use standard kubectl commands to make that happen. So I hope that this information was interesting to you and helpful. As always, there's more that you can find out if you just want to go to our hp.com Ezmeral platform, the hp.com container platform, and learn more about KubeDirector. Download it and use it yourself in your own Kubernetes environment. I gave you the link here to the GitHub account, so fully open source container platform email, and also the demo I walked you through you can use do yourself as well at hpedemoportal.ext.hpe.com, all on the web. You also can follow us on Twitter at HPE_Ezmeral or HPEAI. That'll get you lots of great feeds of information relevant to Kubernetes and container management. So thank you again for your time. And it was really appreciated, and hope you learned something and come back for more.
Thank you.
Thank you.